Hello everyone, my name is Matt Moss and I am a sales engineer with ESET North America. This video is focused on ESET Dynamic Threat Defense, which provides another layer of security for ESET products such as ESET Endpoint Antivirus for Windows, ESET Endpoint Security for Windows, ESET Mail Security for Microsoft Exchange, and ESET File Security for Windows Server that can help to protect your organization from zero-day threats. There are 3 sections to this video. 1. What is ESET Dynamic Threat Defense? 2. How do I get ESET Dynamic Threat Defense activated and configured? And 3. What does ESET Dynamic Threat Defense look like in action? Let's begin with an explanation of what ESET Dynamic Threat Defense does and why it is an important upgrade to your existing ESET products, especially if you are security conscious. The best way to identify a zero-day attack is to run a suspicious sample on a real system in order to understand the behavior of that sample. If the suspicious sample is, in fact, malicious, then the real system may ultimately be sacrificed when running the sample in order to determine the sample's true behavior. Due to the very large number of newly created malicious samples each day, there needs to be an automated process that performs the full analysis, and in order to ensure that this analysis is performed in an expedient manner, machine learning and artificial intelligence are likely to be used during this analysis. For this level of analysis, a large amount of computing resources are necessary. In order to avoid negatively impacting performance of machines, this analysis should be offloaded to a separate set of machines. And this is where ESET Dynamic Threat Defense comes into play. Advanced persistent threats require a behavioral approach to detection. Instead of trying to detect malware based on what it is, signature-based, behavioral malware detection relies on what the malware does. Offloading this in-depth analysis to a security sandbox adds a layer of security that increases threat detection before execution in a live or production environment. This additional security layer is represented by ESET's cloud-based sandbox, ESET Dynamic Threat Defense. By offloading this analysis, you can ensure that your business is fully armed against advanced attacks while your day-to-day operations remain uninterrupted. ESET Dynamic Threat Defense consists of multiple types of sensors that complete static analysis of code, deep inspection of the sample with machine learning, and in-memory introspection and behavior-based detection in a cloud-based sandbox environment. This approach is more efficient than just comparing the signatures of files. Sandboxing looks beyond the appearance of the binary, and because it observes what the file does, sandboxing is more conclusive in determining if the file is malicious than signature-based detection. Analysis in ESET Dynamic Threat Defense uses many of ESET's internal tools for static and dynamic analysis, memory dumping, unpacking, and similarity matching. It evaluates the sample's behavior and uses reputation data and threat intelligence feeds to increase detection accuracy. Once everything is set up, there is no action needed by the administrator or the user, although it is possible to submit suspicious samples manually using the ESET Endpoint Protection Product Local GUI or the associated ESET Management Console. The endpoint or server product automatically decides whether a sample is good, bad, or unknown. If the sample is unknown, it is sent to ESET Dynamic Threat Defense for further analysis. Once a sample is sent to ESET Dynamic Threat Defense, the process of threat analysis begins. 1. 3 separate machine learning models, including deep learning, compare the sample with millions of known malware samples for similarities. 2. The system executes the sample in a virtual environment or sandbox. It simulates user behavior to trick malware samples and uses deep learning neural network models to compare sample behavior with the behavior of all known malware samples available. 3. The latest version of ESET's award-winning scanning engine is used to take everything apart and analyze for anything unusual. And 4. The final result is calculated based on all techniques available and is provided to the customer by way of reports within the associated ESET Management Console. This brings us to our next section. How do I get ESET Dynamic Threat Defense to work once a license is purchased? Do I need to set up another management server? Do I need to install any additional applications? Do I need to do anything locally on machines in order to get ESET Dynamic Threat Defense to work? No. As long as you are using a supported ESET security product on the same machine, then it is just a matter of adding your ESET Dynamic Threat Defense license into your ESET Management Console by using an ESET Business account or ESET MSP Administrator account, synchronizing your ESET Management Console with ESET's licensing servers through a license synchronization operation, activating the appropriate endpoints with the ESET Dynamic Threat Defense license, and then configuring ESET Dynamic Threat Defense options through policy. Supported ESET security products include version 7 and later of ESET Endpoint Antivirus for Windows, ESET Endpoint Security for Windows, ESET Mail Security for Microsoft Exchange Server, and ESET File Security for Microsoft Windows Server. In addition to the required ESET security products, you must be using ESET Security Management Center version 7 or later, or ESET Cloud Administrator, in order to monitor and manage your deployed ESET security products. Additionally, you must have a working ESET business account or ESET MSP Administrator account synchronized with your ESET Management Console. In order to activate ESET Dynamic Threat Defense, you will first need to purchase an ESET Dynamic Threat Defense license. Once purchased, this license needs to be imported into your ESET business account, which will then need to be synchronized with your ESET Management Console. Once the ESET Dynamic Threat Defense license appears in the License Management section of your ESET Management Console, you will then need to run a product activation task against the machines that you would like to activate with ESET Dynamic Threat Defense. Once the activation is complete, you can then configure the associated ESET Dynamic Threat Defense settings through policy in your ESET Management Console. If you are an MSP, the activation steps are only slightly different. In order to activate ESET Dynamic Threat Defense, you will first need to add an ESET Dynamic Threat Defense license to your customer in ESET MSP Administrator, and then you will need to synchronize your ESET Management Console with your ESET MSP Administrator account. Once the ESET Dynamic Threat Defense license appears in the License Management section of your ESET Management Console, you will then need to run a product activation task against the machines that you would like to activate with ESET Dynamic Threat Defense. Once the activation is complete, you can then configure the associated ESET Dynamic Threat Defense settings through policy in your ESET Management Console. When running version 7.2 and later of an ESET security product supported by ESET Dynamic Threat Defense, proactive protection becomes available. At the time of this recording, this affects ESET Endpoint Antivirus for Windows and ESET Endpoint Security for Windows. If a file is submitted to ESET Dynamic Threat Defense, proactive protection blocks its execution during the analysis by ESET Dynamic Threat Defense until the results of the analysis are received or a configurable time has elapsed. Proactive protection affects files downloaded by supported web browsers, to include Microsoft Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Chrome, Firefox, Opera, and Brave browser. Proactive protection affects files downloaded using supported email clients, to include Microsoft Outlook, Mozilla Thunderbird, and Microsoft Mail. Proactive protection affects files unpacked by a supported archiver utility, to include WinRAR, WinZip, Microsoft Explorer built-in unpacker, and 7-zip. Finally, proactive protection also affects files on supported removable devices, to include USB flash drives, USB hard drives, CDs and DVDs, floppy disks, and built-in card readers. Now that we know what ESET Dynamic Threat Defense is for and how to activate this additional layer of protection, let's take some time to see ESET Dynamic Threat Defense in action with a focus on the end-user experience related to proactive protection. Our end user is going to open up Google Chrome and paste a URL into the address bar. This will download an executable that, when run, will trigger behavioral detections through ESET Dynamic Threat Defense. The user is going to attempt to execute this file, but they'll be stopped by Windows Defender Smart Screen. That being said, the user will continue to try to run it anyway. At this point, they will be stopped by ESET Dynamic Threat Defense, which will put a pop-up in the lower right corner of the screen stating that the file is currently being analyzed. The administrator can also view this analysis in the ESET Security Management Center server. They can see file, hash, and status, and by clicking on the record and view behavior, they can see a behavioral report that shows what this sample does. During the course of this video, we reviewed what ESET Dynamic Threat Defense does, how to activate it, and we also saw ESET Dynamic Threat Defense with proactive protection in action. We hope that you have enjoyed this video on ESET Dynamic Threat Defense. Remember to reset with ESET and enjoy safer technology.